Okay, if you remember last week, we were looking at density and walkability. We talked about, how transportation costs, how driving costs vary as you move from, I think we went to Lincoln Park and then Oak Park, Elmhurst, Naperville, and then finally out to Elburn, right? Elburn is a suburb on the far western suburbs, kind of on the fringe of the metropolitan area. Right, if you remember correctly, the driving costs were color coded from green to red. So any place, in this case, any place you live in Elburn, your annual driving or annual transportation costs are going to be pretty high. Why is that? Because I shouldn't make judgments or dump on Elburn. I've never been out there, but my guess would be probably like a lot of communities in the metropolitan area, right? You really can't do much of anything without getting in your car, right? If you want to go to the grocery store, you probably got to get in your car. If you want to go to the Walgreens, got to get in your car, right? If you want to arrange a play date for your children and have them visit with one of the other kids in their class, you probably got to get in your car, right? So why would someone choose to live way out there where they always have to drive? Well, again, they might find Elburn particularly pleasing. I don't know. Again, I shouldn't make judgments, but chances are one of the reasons why families might look to move to an outer ring suburb is because of affordability, right? In the real estate business, and I don't actually see Ayana here, so I think she's a real estate broker, so she will always correct me if I say something wrong about her business. But um, one reason that families might choose to move to a place like Elbert is to find affordable housing, to find housing that they can afford. Unfortunately, in the drive, so to speak, to find affordable housing, they have high transportation costs. So yes, their housing costs or the cost of the house is such that the bank will give them a mortgage. Everything looks good, except now that they're going to have potentially high transportation costs because they have to drive every place. So maybe they're not better off after all. Um, maybe choosing a house that's a little bit closer into the city that probably costs more, certainly rents for more. Maybe in the long term, that's better off because transportation costs are lower. So that's one of the things we were talking about. Does that make sense? Unfortunately, I think this Center for Neighborhood Technology, or CNT, has been trying to push this idea of having banks and lenders look at both housing and transportation costs. I don't think it's really caught on yet. So I'm guessing there's still a lot of families that are. I'll turn my video back on here. Hopefully it doesn't sink the ship. Doesn't sink the bandwidth ship. Okay, does that make sense? Last week we also talked about zoning. Remember, zoning is where jurisdictions or municipalities divide parcels up and categorize them according to their use. Right, R is residential. So a lot of cities have a lot of their land zoned for single family residential. For a number of reasons, cities are beginning to rethink that, right? The number of reasons might be affordability, they might be sustainability, They might be equity, right? Those are reasons why some cities are beginning to think this, right? If the only place that families can find housing is way out in the outer rings of the metropolitan area, maybe something is wrong. So cities are beginning to think about whether that zoning map that they draw is the best thing for them, right? They want to be able to, in many cases, increase the supply of housing. I don't think we have this problem quite yet in the Chicago metropolitan area, but certainly in other parts of the country. I think California is kind of the poster child of housing supply, right? There's a tremendous shortage of housing in California, right? The number of housing units built is nowhere near in line with the number of people that are looking for houses. So again, looking at or rethinking single family zoning is one option there, right? As we mentioned, zoning in some senses was designed to make sure that incompatible uses are not adjacent to each other, right? We don't want to have a house and then have a factory next door, or have a gentleman's club next door, or something like that, right? We want to have some control over what's in our neighborhood. So this single family house on a plot of land is kind of been the American ideal, but people are beginning to take another look at that ideal and make sure, to see it, does it still work in the 21st century? Again, what are some of the issues? We have a problem with inadequate supply of housing. We have a problem with affordability. We have a problem with equity or racial inequity, right? And when we looked at Wheaton, we saw that an R2 in Wheaton was a fairly large lot. And, that's probably worked to keep Wheaton a largely white community, because people of color, frankly, are unlikely or may not be able to afford those houses on such big lots. And obviously we have the overriding issue, right? The reason that we're in this class this semester is to look at climate change. Again, if you have to get in your car all the time to go to the grocery store or the drugstore, that makes it really hard to reduce your greenhouse gas emissions as a family. But obviously, like many changes, not everyone is in favor of this, right? Oftentimes the folks that already live there, that already own property, are going to be uncomfortable with change. It's going to change the character of my neighborhood. It's going to bring in quote unquote undesirable people. It's going to lower property values. So even though there are some, as we see, some upsides, there are some entrenched interests who may think otherwise. Again, kind of the place that this is playing out most strongly is in California, right? California, as I say, is a tremendous problem with housing supply, and I think they're trying to perhaps move from a situation of overcrowding to increased density, right? Enough homes for all the people. Maybe those are smaller homes on smaller lots, or in low-rise multifamily buildings. But if we increase the supply of housing, we hopefully can also improve affordability. So let me play a video here.
Look, there's a Jaguar. And I'm a spider monkey.
Megan and Ben Finch hoped to raise their son Jack in San Francisco.
It's a wonderful place.
But at $3,600 a month for their 800 square foot walk-up,
We have decided to leave the Bay Area and to relocate to Portland, Oregon.
she's a lawyer, he's a teacher.
About 40% of our take-home income goes to rent.
California's Bay Area, home to Google, Facebook, and Apple, is among the most expensive housing markets in the country, where even modest-looking homes list for millions of dollars.
We have more people who want to live here than we have housing. So there's a mismatch. We need more.
To activist Sonia Traus, the issue is one of supply and demand. She's a leader in a growing nationwide movement known as YIMBY.
YIMBY stands for Yes in My Backyard. It's somebody that says we need more housing. And even if I personally am anxious about my neighborhood changing, I realize there's a greater good and we need more housing, even if it's in my backyard.
One of the biggest problems, she says, zoning laws that restrict 82% of residential land in the Bay Area to single-family homes and prevent denser housing multiplexes and townhouses.
Single-family zoning was adopted in 1916 to prevent a dance hall in the exclusive Elmwood district, which was predominantly used by African Americans.
So it was rooted in racism.
It was rooted in racism.
Berkeley's mayor, Jesse Arreguín, is a convert. Admittedly, once in opposition to much new development, he's now pro-density, in part out of necessity.
How do you describe the housing issues in your community?
Describe it as an emergency. You know, we're seeing unprecedented levels of homelessness, people that are facing housing insecurity, and I really think the root of the problem is the lack of housing.
Rick Hall is president of Livable California, arguing more housing won't make the Bay Area any more affordable.
You're never going to get to the point where adding supply at the high end trickles down to help the real people.
He wants decisions on zoning made locally and for the focus to be on state-subsidized affordable housing built in commercial districts.
If you look at Manhattan or Seattle or Vancouver, density hasn't made housing affordable.
Mayor Arreguín believes it will.
This is a 4-unit property, and as you can see, it really fits into the neighborhood that it's in.
He and Berkeley's entire city council are pushing to end single-family zoning to allow for more multiplexes like this, hoping more housing throughout the Bay Area.
I feel sad that the place that I envisioned living my life, raising my kids, that isn't going to happen.
Will mean fewer tough decisions for families like the Finches. Thanks for watching our YouTube channel.
Turn my volume up here. That's pretty interesting. Again, the situation with housing supply or shortage of housing is much more acute in California than it is here locally, but that still doesn't mean that we couldn't have more housing supply and more houses that people can afford. So in the case of California, the California state government has, this is, again, remember that zoning takes place at the local level, right? At the level of the individual, town and village. I think the state of California is trying to cut through that a little bit and passed this law recently, right, that allows homeowners to divide their lot and allows additional density, additional dwelling units on every site. This one's a little bit hard to see. Right here's, this is Portland, Oregon, another city that has been struggling with the same issue. Again, looking at turning zoning from, one dwelling unit on a lot to 2 or 4 units on a lot. And even more if those dwelling units are at regulated or affordable prices. Like again, trying to put more houses on the same number of lots. You see this term here, ADU. ADU means accessory dwelling unit, sometimes referred to as a granny flat, right? But ADU, or accessory dwelling unit, you'll see that terminology in many of these ordinances here. So again, it's the notion that, well, maybe maybe in the backyard of my house or on the backside of my lot, I can build a smaller housing unit, you know, maybe a garage with some living space above it, right? Something like that. Again, these are things that cities are trying to do to increase supply. And again, you saw the various things that are trying to be addressed with increasing supply: affordability, equity, drivability, sustainability. Again, we don't have this stuff going on in the Chicago area yet, but we might see it at some point soon. Okay, well, let me just present one other idea here, one other development concept, and that's what's called the TOD, or transit-oriented development. Right? Transit-oriented development is mixed use. We're putting, again, mixed use is where we have residential and commercial units, uses in the same area. And TOD is really a design, an urban design philosophy, right, where we're looking at residential and commercial development together that's located close to public transportation, and where we put in features to encourage transit ridership and dissuade the ownership of automobiles. So we might want to make it easy for people to walk by having the public transportation, the metro stop or the L stop, have that close by, have the homes and the dry cleaner nearby, so maybe folks don't have to own cars. Right. Again, this is how the city of Chicago, that's how we initially developed Chicago, right? When Chicago, enjoyed its period of greatest growth in the 1920s, right? The automobile was still relatively uncommon. So, we have a city that was built around public transportation and streetcars. Right, in a transit-oriented development, we typically start with a center, built around a transit station or a transit stop. And then surrounded by, as you see, high density development with progressively lower density spreading outward. Again, this would be an urban planning concept. So this would, planning happens, not at the level of an individual project, but an overarching strategy that's employed at individual properties would follow that development strategy. Right? So to make this work, we have to think about, how far people are willing to walk. Right? People are generally willing to walk a quarter to a half a mile from their transit stop. Right? This is scaling things appropriately for pedestrians. Right? We're trying to address the last mile. Right? If that distance that you have to walk is too far, you're going to say, you know what, that's too much to walk. I can't walk there every day, or every day I'm going to get in my car and drive. But we're trying to dissuade, through good planning, we're trying to dissuade people from getting in their cars. We're trying to make it so people don't necessarily have to own cars. Again, Back to the Future, right? Much of the city of Chicago is already transit oriented, right? We're following the same definition because we have a grid of commercial streets and we have bus lines that are generally spaced at half-mile intervals. So throughout many areas of the city of Chicago, you can easily walk to a bus, get on the bus, and take the bus to transit and go where you need to go. Or hopefully the things that you want to go to are nearby. Okay, let me play a couple of other videos here related to transit-oriented development, kind of how we, how we got from, what cities looked like in the early part of the 20th century to, what they looked like in the latter part of the 20th century, right from 1920 to 1960 or 1970, and then how we're trying to perhaps bring things back to, what we found that worked in the past. So let me put up another video here. Oh, stop sharing.
You think about urban design today, where are we in the continuum? Is this an ebb and flow? Are we coming back and forth into an idea, an ethic, a philosophy that we've had?
Yeah, I think we're returning to some timeless qualities. We took a little detour after World War II. We were wealthier than any other middle class in the history of mankind, and we had a new technology that everybody was in love with, and we subsidized it with highway investments and with GI bills, and we got sprawl. 2008 crash was about people not being able to afford to drive that far to have that size yard. But simultaneously, the demographics have shifted. It's not that everybody's going to move back to the city. That's a little bit of a misnomer that people get very excited about. So we've got to rethink the way we build our cities. It can't be this one-size-fits-all paradigm that we've had for so long.
So what are the best kind of cities or towns that you've seen around the country, and how they're coping with different kind of climate-related problems, or as they think about and this, what kind of yields have they gotten back?
Well, the signature, of course, is Portland, and everybody discounts Portland. I don't know why. Portland was a complete dump in the 60s and 70s. I mean, nobody wanted to be in Portland. The downtown was horrible. But they basically, through great design and by shifting from cars and highways to transit, there was a seminal moment in 1990 where they decided to build the West Side Light Rail line and put, like a string of pearls along it, a series of neighborhoods that were walkable instead of a new Beltway freeway. Same dollars, just shifted to a whole nother system, not only of transportation, but of living. Complete success story. So by 96, the average vehicle miles traveled per household in Portland has dropped, whereas the average across America has continued to rise. So we become more and more auto dependent with all the negative attributes that brings. But Portland is kind of a case study and a proof. It's a laboratory that says, yeah, this really works.
The urban heat islands that we see in big cities, how significant is it when we have density without planning, in the sense that without having perhaps green roofs or enough open space, et cetera, et cetera?
It's ironic because one of the first places I worked in my life was Sacramento, and the reverse was true. Downtown Sacramento, which had these beautiful canopies over the streets, was on average 10 degrees cooler in the summer than the suburbs, which didn't have mature trees and were more spread out. And so actually it's not always the case that you get this heat island effect. And that goes to the key issue here. The moment you create great walkable streets, and believe me, street trees are always a central piece of that. You can't have a great street without great street trees. You solve a lot of that problem right then and there. Street trees, it's that simple. And yeah, you can do white roofs and green roofs, and there are other mitigating factors, but believe me, it's that street canopy that makes all the difference.
Okay, let me play one more here. It'll be by the same person speaking. You know, I looked around to find different people talking about the same topic, and oops, you know, that's not right. So back to Portland again.
The formula for a transit-oriented development is very simple. It's diversity in population and in land use. And so you have a place where you have a range of housing opportunities. You don't want to ever say, this is a place for one kind of person, you know, lofts for young people or condos for empty nesters or apartment buildings for seniors or anything like that. You want it to be a complete neighborhood. So you get a pretty broad range of household types and ages and incomes. And then it has to be mixed with local destinations, local stores, cafes, shops, civic places, parks, schools. So diversity of population and of land use. Now that's not enough. I can show you places in the suburbs that are actually diverse. There's an office park on one corner, a shopping mall on another, and a condo on the third, and a subdivision on the fourth. And there's no walkability. It's all divided by these huge, massive arterials with giant pedestrian unfriendly crossings. And we really had to work hard to invent a landscape that would make a local destination a car trip. I mean, it took some doing, but we somehow achieved it. And which is, you know, any local destination happens to now be on an arterial, a place where you look kind of foolish walking, if not in danger. So the next fundamental part of a TOD is this idea of the human scale, of bringing the pedestrian back into the picture and creating streets that are pedestrian and bike friendly as well as auto friendly. And it's quite a tricky job. You know, once again, the old paradigm is there, Elm Street leading to Main Street. It's pretty good formula, and it does work, and it is being reborn, and we're seeing that. People like to shop on Main Street more than in the mall, and certainly they like to be able to walk there without having to cross an 8-lane arterial. And so that walkability and pedestrian human scale plays on many levels. I mean, what is lining, what do you experience as you walk? Is it a series of garage doors, or is it a series of front porches? Do you have that old tree canopy overhead? You know, there are lots of issues about how you shape the public domain so that it's really truly pedestrian friendly. And so I think those are the two fundamental design criteria of what makes a good TOD. Density, intensity, these are things that vary place to place. As our population matures and as the economy shifts, I think we're going to see more and more density. People are going to understand that living in a townhouse that's truly in a town, as opposed to floating off in the middle of nowhere, makes a lot of sense for a lot of people. And so, you know, when you have so little that's of value in the public domain, no wonder people want large yards to escape into. But if you no longer have to escape the public world, you perhaps don't need quite as big a private domain.
Okay, I will put those links up for you to watch if you're so inclined. Again, we're looking at ways of shaping or modifying our cities and our spaces such that they are denser and hopefully more walkable. So we hopefully can provide affordability, right? So again, you heard the excuse me, the gentleman there say a couple of things, right? Walkability, walkable design, really pedestrian is the highest priority, mixture of uses, high density, reduced and managed parking, right? So we want to try to relegate or control the amount of parking that we provide, right? These are all things that are part of urban design. So this may not happen at the level of an individual site or an individual property, but this is a design then that individual buildings would fit in with. Right, so why is walkability important? Again, we've been talking about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. I found this interesting article. Again, I'm an engineer, right? I'm a numbers person, so you know, looking at numbers and analyzing them and understanding what they mean, you know, is something that I do, right? But so in this case, CSD means a conventional. Yes, Fred.
What kind of engineer are you?
I am a mechanical engineer, or probably more specifically an energy engineer. So my career is, I might have said this at the beginning of the semester, right? Most of my career has been about trying to figure out ways of making buildings more efficient. So
Okay.
anyways, right. So in this case, right, here is a CSD is what this document called a conventional suburban development versus transit-oriented development. We just looked at what transit-oriented development means. It means walkability. So in this case, my takeaway from this is that, you know, you can make your house in a conventional development as efficient as you want. You can drive a Prius or an efficient car, but really the most important thing is to not have to get into that car in the first place, right? You see how much of a household transportation, how much household energy is related to transportation, right? That's the biggest part of it. So finding ways to have it so people don't have to get in their cars in the first place, right? That has a huge impact on household energy use, right? You can't, it's very, very hard for you to overcome that with your green features on your house or your Prius, right? So where your house is located is extremely important. We looked at this early in the semester. Remember, I went through some of the key features of green buildings. Well, location is certainly one of the key features of what makes a building green. It's built near other existing buildings. It reuses existing site, right, or existing building, adaptive reuse. Doesn't build in a natural area. It's near public transportation. Right? If we follow those things, then that's a lot like what transit-oriented development is. And with, I think I started doing these slides last year. I put the little picture of that little bugger that we're trying to get rid of, that COVID virus. You know, we've seen some trends in the last year and a half or two with COVID. Right, we've seen in a lot of cases mass transit use has fallen dramatically as many white collar workers are working from home, right? Some people like me, right? My work can be done remotely, so I don't have to get on the blue line. That's the blue line stop near my house. I don't have to get on the blue line to go to work. I can stay in my house, in my home. Unfortunately, lots of essential workers, right, frontline employees, they still have to rely on public transportation. So if there's a decline in ridership, the revenue for mass transportation systems has fallen dramatically, right? Less money collected because not as many people are riding. So part of the way that transportation agencies like the CTA, the Chicago Transit Authority, right, maybe one of the ways that they've responded to this reduction in revenue is to reduce service. Unfortunately, that reduction in service has a disproportionate impact on those essential workers, those frontline workers. Maybe a lot of those are workers of color who may not have many other options. So we'll have to see how this plays out as we get through COVID. Right. Well, again, another thing, we'll have to see how things play out. You know, in the past 3 years, a lot of young, I use the term knowledge workers, right? Tech savvy folks. You know, they've been looking for jobs in housing in the city center rather than in the suburbs. You know, companies have responded by moving their headquarters into the city, right? McDonald's used to be headquartered in Oak Brook. Now McDonald's has their headquarters in downtown Chicago. Many of other companies have done the same thing, right? Employers have opened new locations in the city center to cater to attract these young workers, right? Putting housing and jobs in close proximity, you know, has really been a positive outcome. Again, we'll have to see how things change, how this changes all with COVID, right? If you know, when COVID is over with, when we're through this, are people still going to want to work in all these offices in the city center that have been good for transit-oriented development, for density, for mixed uses? So, any questions? Okay, I'm gonna switch to one other short presentation here that we'll get through. Before the break. So again, you'll see a kind of common theme here for the next, actually for the rest of the semester, right? I'll have a lecture like the first one, where I'm trying to outline broad ideas, give you understanding, help you understand things better, and then we'll bring it down to the LEED, how that looks from the standpoint of the LEED rating system, right? So in LEED, we have so I'll talk about these as LEED strategies, right? Earlier in the semester, we had LEED fundamentals. Now we're going to talk about, my little video light's blinking on and off here. I hope that doesn't mean I'm losing my connection. We'll now talk about strategies, right? What are some of the things that you can do as a construction professional to make your project greener, more sustainable, right? To earn LEED credit points. So now we're in. Bea, good question. It's really an urban, well, it's multiple things. It's probably an urban design issue as well as a political one, right? Political in the sense of policies that units of governments take. I think in one of those, you saw that Mr. Calthorpe there said that the city of Portland had a decision, you know, back in the early 1990s, right? They could invest money in a freeway, or they could invest money in a light rail transportation system. They chose to make the investment in light rail, and because of that choice, many other good things happened, right? Had the city chosen to build that freeway, right, it envisioned that the city had decided to do another Kennedy Expressway, right, cutting right through the middle of the city. Even the best urban designers would have had, you know, tremendous difficulty, you know, building on that foundation. So it's really a combination of political decisions and good design. Does that make sense? Right. So again, a urban designer is a profession, you know, different or distinct from architecture, right? Architects can be urban designers, but really urban designers are you know, kind of playing at a broader scale than architects are, right? Urban designers may be looking at a whole area or a whole neighborhood and laying out the framework, and then individual architects and construction teams would in essence, you know, build out within that design framework. Right, so what are the most important thing, right? Location, 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 right? That's the I think that's the terminology from real estate, right? Location is an extremely important aspect of sustainable design. Where we put that building and how it is developed has lots of impacts on resources over the life of the building. So once we decide to where we're going to locate our building, you know, a lot of things follow from that, right? We've baked a lot of energy use, the potential energy use into our building if we decide to locate our building out in the periphery of the city, right? Out in a place where there's no density or no public transportation, right? We can have an extremely efficient building, but yet if we look at the energy consumption of the building and what it takes for all the people to drive there, you see we haven't really accomplished anything. So we have to think carefully about where we build, because we're making decisions that will have long-term implications. Right, so what are some of the things that play into location, right? Location has to do with the natural context, the climate, you know, what the climate and the soils and the sun are like in the area that we want to build. Infrastructure context, right? Infrastructure are the roads and the transportation networks and the utilities, right? The gas and the water and the sewer. And also the social context, right? Where we are, you know, what's going on in the surrounding community. Is there any historic value in that site? Again, so what are some of the things in our, and again, I'll have this little graphic here in many of my lead strategy slides, a little toolbox, right? Toolbox of things that you as an architect or a designer or a member of a lead project team, some things you might want to reach in for your toolbox and get out of, right? So certainly the biggest strategy we have is to increase density, right? Put as much floor area as we can on, maximize the floor area and minimize the size of the site. You know, choose redevelopment and infill development. We renovate an existing building, develop sites between existing structures, maybe remediate brownfields, right? So brownfield would be a site that's already been built upon or has been built upon in the past. We're going to locate near existing infrastructure, reduce costs for utility, avoid sprawl, consolidate development. The opposite of a greenfield is a brownfield, and not, or excuse me, the opposite of a brownfield is a greenfield, right? Greenfield generally talks about new development on a site that has never been built on before. Increase diversity of uses, right? If possible, have more than one thing happening on that site. Encourage multiple modes of transportation. Right, again, in the LEED rating system, there'll be a number of things related to transportation. You know, how the length and the frequency of trips, how do people, what technology do they move to get to and from the site? So again, from a toolbox or from a strategy perspective, right, the most important thing again would be to choose a site that's adjacent to or in close proximity to mass transit. To the extent that you can, limit parking capacity. You might be, your zoning may require that you have a certain number of parking spaces. Maybe, but ideally you can, limit the amount of parking that you develop, right? Because that parking, as we'll see in the back half of the evening, right, that parking is something that's you're going to have to deal with in terms of stormwater. I'm going to make it encourage biking and walking, if at all possible, make it convenient for the people using your building. Right, if you're at, so this is design, so this is the LEED BD&C world, building design. If you happen to be looking at LEED O&M, operations maintenance. Does somebody have a question? So if you're looking at, if you're going after LEED for a existing building, looking at operations, you might want to do things to encourage carpooling, to encourage alternate fuel vehicles, maybe have EV charging stations, support alternate modes of transportation. Again, at Triton, we have some EV charging stations. We are served by a shuttle bus and by some bus service, although I don't know how often those buses run. Right, so again, here's our LEED scorecards. Right, here's BD&C, and sorry, these are a little hard to see. I'll have to make sure these are loaded up on Blackboard so you can see them better. So again, LT credits in B, that's got to be BD&C, building design and construction, focus on design. O&M credits focus on operations. And in LEED ND or neighborhood design, right, we're looking at things that are similar to what we just saw for urban planning. Right, again, LEED ND is about designing a neighborhood as opposed to designing an individual building. Things we just talked about: design walkable streets, appeal to pedestrians, limit vehicle speeds. Right, one of the points that the gentleman made on one of those videos is, yeah, we have a condominium and an office building and a store, all on opposite corners. But if you have to cross take your life in your hands to cross a 6 or 8 lane road to get from one corner to the other, that's not really walkability. Right, we want to have amenities, things that make pedestrians feel comfortable: shade, benches, trees. We're going to look at compactness, increase units in commercial square, put as many units and as much square footage as we can on the same land area. And we want to make it so people can get around. Right, things we've all talked about here. Again, if you're looking at designing a neighborhood, things we just saw there with transit-oriented development, diverse land uses, diversity of housing types, access to good food, access to grocery stores. So again, this is LEED ND, LEED for neighborhood development. Any questions? Okay, well, it is at the top of the hour here. Why don't we take a 10-minute break or so? We'll get started again at 10 minutes after 8 or thereabouts.